Live simpler, live happier. The things to let go of. Have you ever stopped to think about how much you're still holding on to? Not just old belongings gathering dust in the attic, but the habits, the worries, the expectations that no longer serve you. The truth is, after 70, life isn't just about what you've gained, it's about what you're willing to let go of. Because the things you carry with you, both physically and emotionally, shape the way you experience the years ahead. Maybe you've spent decades working hard, taking care of others, always putting your needs last. Maybe you've held onto beliefs about aging that make you feel like your best years are behind you. But here's the thing. What if they're not? What if the life you truly want is just on the other side of letting go? Stick with me, because in this video, we're going to talk about the things that are worth releasing, the burdens, the regrets, even the possessions that might be holding you back from truly enjoying your later years. You might be surprised at how much lighter, freer, and more fulfilled life can feel when you stop gripping so tightly to the past. Before we dive in, if you find value in content that helps you embrace life with wisdom and joy, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button if this resonates with you, and drop a comment below. What's one thing you've let go of that made your life better? Let's get started. 1. The burden of unnecessary belongings. Have you ever looked around your home and wondered why so much of the past is still sitting there, gathering dust? A closet packed with clothes that don't fit, a garage filled with tools you haven't used in years, shelves stacked with books you swore you'd read again. Funny how things pile up, isn't it? Every item once had a purpose, a story. But one day, you wake up and realize, most of it isn't part of your life anymore. I know that feeling well. I grew up in a time when everything was worth keeping. You didn't toss things just because they were old. You saved them, fixed them, held onto them for someday. That habit stuck with me for decades. Even now, I catch myself hesitating before letting go of an old pair of boots or a set of dishes from the 80s. The voice in my head says, you might need this again. But you know what? That day never comes. One afternoon, I stood in my garage, looking at boxes I hadn't opened in years. I realized I wasn't the same person who put them there. Those things weren't useful anymore. They were just taking up space, in my home and in my mind. The weight of clutter is something you don't feel until you start letting it go. The first time I donated a box of old clothes, I felt a strange sense of guilt, almost like I was betraying my past self. But then, I imagined someone else finding warmth in that coat, someone who truly needed it. Suddenly, it didn't feel like losing something. It felt like doing something right. So, I started small. One shelf, one drawer at a time. I'd pick something up and ask myself, have I used this in the past year? Do I even like it? Could someone else benefit from it? Most of the time, the answer was clear. The more I let go, the lighter I felt. It wasn't just about clearing space. It was about clearing my mind, making room for things that actually mattered. And then I realized, this isn't just about stuff. It's about responsibilities, too. We spend a lifetime taking care of others, carrying burdens we never question. But as we get older, we have to ask ourselves, does this still belong to me? Maybe you've always been the one people turn to, the one who fixes everything. But is it still your role? Or is it time to step back and allow yourself some peace? For years, I thought saying no meant letting people down. Now, I see that letting go isn't giving up, it's choosing what truly matters. When we free ourselves from things we no longer need, whether physical clutter or emotional burdens, we make space for something far more valuable. Ease, clarity, and a life that fits who we are today. So take a look around. Pick one thing, one responsibility, one weight on your shoulders, and ask yourself, is this helping me, or is it just holding me back? If it's time to let go, don't think of it as losing something. Think of it as gaining freedom. 2. Responsibilities that are no longer yours to carry. Have you ever caught yourself hesitating before saying no? Maybe it's an old habit, being the reliable one, the problem solver, the person who keeps everything running smoothly. For years, that might have been your role, and you carried it with pride. But now, as life shifts, a new question emerges. Do I still need to hold on to all of this? I remember the moment it hit me. I was standing in my garage, staring at shelves filled with boxes, old toys, keepsakes, papers I hadn't touched in years. Each one held a memory, a piece of the past when my home was full of life and movement. I thought, if I let these things go, am I letting go of those moments too? The idea was unsettling at first. But then, I realized something. The memories weren't in the objects. They were in me, and by holding on to things I no longer needed, I was also holding on to responsibilities, habits, and worries that no longer served me. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting, it means making space. Space for yourself, for joy, for ease. For the first time in my life, I started to understand that saying no wasn't selfish, it was wise. I didn't need to be at the center of everything anymore. My children were grown. The people I cared about could take care of themselves. And most importantly, I was allowed to take care of myself, too. There's an expert I once read about, a psychologist who studied the effects of clutter, both physical and emotional, on well-being. She found that people who held onto too much, whether it was stuff in their homes or obligations in their lives, often carried higher stress levels. It wasn't just about the objects, it was about the weight of unspoken expectations. The idea that we must keep doing something simply because we always have. A friend of mine, Tom, learned this the hard way. He had spent decades taking care of everyone, his wife, his children, even his coworkers. Retirement didn't change that. He was the guy who still volunteered for everything, who couldn't sit still. But one day, his body forced him to stop. A minor health scare made him realize he wasn't invincible. And for the first time, he asked himself, what if I just let go? It was terrifying for him at first. Who was he, if he wasn't the one keeping everything together? But as he slowly stepped back, something amazing happened. Life kept going. His children figured things out. His friends didn't resent him for saying no. And he finally had time for himself, to rest, to travel, to enjoy the years ahead. So, ask yourself, what are you still carrying that you don't have to? What are the responsibilities, the habits, the things taking up space in your life that no longer bring you joy? Letting go doesn't have to be drastic. It can start small. Say no to something you don't truly want to do. Give away one thing you don't need. Allow yourself a moment of rest without guilt. Life is lighter when we stop carrying things we no longer need. And once we make that space, we open ourselves up to the next phase, the one where we embrace change instead of fearing it. Do you agree that sometimes change is the key to growth? Drop a 1 in the comments if you're ready to embrace change, or a 0 if you're still unsure. Let's hear your thoughts. 3. The fear of change. You've felt it too, haven't you? That moment when life shifts beneath your feet, when something you've known for years suddenly isn't quite the same. Maybe it's your home, once filled with the sounds of a busy life, now feeling a little too big, a little too quiet. Maybe it's your body, moving slower than it used to, making even simple tasks feel like a challenge. Or maybe it's the world itself, racing forward with new technology, new ways of doing things, leaving you wondering if you'll ever catch up. Change. It comes whether we're ready or not. I used to fight it, clinging to the familiar like a shipwrecked sailor hanging on to driftwood. There was comfort in routine, in the way things had always been. But the more I resisted, the heavier life felt. Until one day, I had to face a simple truth. Change wasn't the problem. My fear of it was. A friend of mine, Jim, learned this lesson the hard way. He'd lived in the same house for over 40 years, a place where every scratch on the floor told a story, where the backyard had seen countless barbecues and family gatherings. But as the years went on, maintaining it became harder. The stairs felt steeper, the yard work more exhausting. His children, now with families of their own, gently suggested he move to a smaller place, something easier to manage. But Jim wouldn't hear of it. "This house is my life," he'd say. He held on, pushing himself to keep up, until one day he fell. A broken hip, months of recovery, and then the inevitable decision: he had to move. At first, he was bitter. He saw it as a loss, a surrender to age. But then, something surprising happened. In his new, smaller home, he found something unexpected: freedom. No more endless maintenance, no more worrying about climbing stairs or fixing things. His days became lighter, filled with more time for the things he loved: reading, reconnecting with old friends, even picking up a new hobby. The house hadn't been his life, after all. His life was still his, waiting to be lived in new ways. I think about that when I see people resisting technology. I was the same way once. When my grandkids tried to show me how to use a smartphone, I waved them off. "I don't need all that nonsense," I'd say. But one day, curiosity got the better of me. I gave it a try. And just like that, a whole new world opened up. Video calls, instant pictures, messages that brought my loved ones closer, even when they were far away. I had spent years avoiding something that could have made my life richer all along. And then there's the hardest change of all: accepting help. Oh, that one stings, doesn't it? After a lifetime of being the strong one, the provider, the one others leaned on, suddenly being the one who needs a hand feels like defeat. But here's what I've learned. Accepting help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's knowing that we're not meant to carry everything alone. A friend offering to drive you somewhere, a neighbor helping with groceries. It's not charity, it's kindness. And kindness, my friend, is meant to be shared. So here's the thing. Change isn't taking something away from you. It's giving you something new. A new way to live, a new way to connect, a new way to find joy. And yes, it might be uncomfortable at first. It might even hurt a little. But what if, instead of fearing it, you leaned into it? What if you saw it as an invitation, not a threat? I want you to think about one change in your life right now. Something you've been resisting. Something you've been afraid to embrace. Maybe it's downsizing. Maybe it's learning something new. Maybe it's simply letting go of an old habit that no longer serves you. Whatever it is, I want you to ask yourself, what if this change isn't the end? What if it's the beginning of something better? 4. Unhealthy habits that no longer serve you. I came across a statistic the other day that caught my attention. The average person spends about 90,000 hours of their life working. Think about that for a moment. That's decades of our time spent chasing deadlines, meeting expectations, and following routines. But how much of that time do we actually spend taking care of ourselves? How often do we stop and ask if our daily habits are actually serving us? It's easy to get caught up in life and assume we'll have time to make changes later. But as the years pass, we start to feel the effects of those choices in ways we never expected. I remember when I was younger, I never gave much thought to what I was putting into my body. I ate whatever was convenient, whatever tasted good, and I never thought twice about the long-term impact. I had energy to burn, and I figured I'd always bounce back. I could pull an all-nighter and be fine the next day. I could eat a greasy burger at midnight and never feel sluggish in the morning. But as time went on, I started noticing the difference. The foods that once seemed harmless started to slow me down. I'd wake up feeling heavier, less energized. My body was telling me something, but for the longest time, I ignored it. I told myself it was just part of getting older. But deep down, I knew better. And that's the thing. Most of us know better. We know when a habit isn't serving us. We know when we're running on fumes. But change is hard, isn't it? We get used to our routines. We tell ourselves we'll start tomorrow, or next week, or when things settle down. But the truth is, there's never a perfect time. There's just now. I had a friend, a doctor, who once told me something that stuck with me. Your body is always listening. It remembers every meal, every movement, every moment of rest or neglect. He wasn't trying to scare me, but rather to remind me that the little choices we make each day matter more than we think. It's not about making drastic changes overnight. It's about paying attention, noticing how we feel after a meal, recognizing when we need rest, giving our bodies the same care and respect we'd give to someone we love. One thing I've learned is that movement is non-negotiable. And I'm not talking about hitting the gym or training for a marathon. I'm talking about simple movement, taking a walk, stretching in the morning, standing up and rolling your shoulders after sitting too long. There was a time when I thought exercise had to be intense to count. But now, I see it differently. A short walk in the fresh air, a few minutes of stretching, it makes all the difference. My joints feel better, my energy lasts longer, and I don't take for granted the simple ability to move with ease. And then there's rest. That's another thing I used to take for granted. I spent years pushing through exhaustion, believing that rest was something to be earned rather than something essential. But let me tell you, your body will let you know when it's had enough. And if you don't listen, it will force you to. These days, I don't just allow myself to rest, I prioritize it. I've stopped wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor. I drink more water, I let myself take breaks, and I remind myself that taking care of myself isn't selfish, it's necessary. There's something else I've realized as I've gotten older. It's tempting to believe that we've earned the right to do whatever we want, to indulge, to let go, to stop caring. But I don't see it that way anymore. I see aging as an opportunity, an invitation to finally put ourselves first, to honor our bodies, not because we have to, but because we deserve to. It's not about giving things up, it's about making choices that make us feel good. So tell me, what's one small change you can make today? One habit you can let go of, or one new habit you can start? Don't think about the past, don't get caught up in regrets. Just start where you are. Because your body has carried you this far, it's time to give it the care it deserves. And here's something I want you to think about. When we start changing our habits, we often face something unexpected, our own self-judgment. We look back and regret the choices we made. We tell ourselves we should have done better. But let me tell you something. Self-criticism won't move you forward. Self-compassion will. You've done the best you could with what you knew at the time. And now, you know better. So be kind to yourself as you make these changes. Have you been too hard on yourself in the past? If you think it's time to show yourself more kindness, drop a 1 in the comments. If you're still working on it, drop a 0. Either way, just know, you're not alone in this. And it's never too late to start taking better care of yourself. 5. Regret and the habit of self-criticism. Have you ever looked back on your life and felt like you should have done things differently? Maybe you replay old conversations, regretting words left unsaid or actions taken too late. Maybe you wonder how things might have turned out if you had been braver, smarter, or just a little luckier. It's a strange thing, isn't it? The way our minds hold onto past mistakes, as if reliving them will somehow change the outcome. I used to do that a lot. There was a time when I believed in perfection, the perfect career, the perfect family, the perfect life. We were surrounded by images of people who seemed to have it all together, and it was easy to feel like we were falling short. I chased that image, thinking if I worked hard enough, if I made all the right choices, I'd finally get there. But looking back, I realized that so much of that was just an illusion. Perfection was never real, only the pressure to achieve it was. For years, I carried my regrets like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. I would think about the times I could have spoken up but didn't, the chances I let slip away, the ways I failed myself or others. The more I dwelled on them, the heavier they became. Regret is like that. It doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It takes up space, steals your peace, and convinces you that you'll never be enough. But here's what I've learned. No matter how much you regret the past, it won't change what's already happened. The only thing it changes is how you feel right now. I spent too much time focusing on what I didn't do that I never gave myself credit for what I did do. Every choice I made, even the ones I questioned later, led me to where I am today. And that realization made all the difference. It wasn't easy to shift my mindset. At first, it felt unnatural to show myself kindness when I was so used to self-criticism. But then I asked myself, if a dear friend came to me with the same regrets, would I be so harsh with them? Would I tell them they failed? No, I would remind them of their resilience, their strength, the lessons they've learned. So why not offer myself that same kindness? That's when everything changed. I stopped chasing perfection and started embracing reality. I let go of the idea that I had to be flawless to be worthy. Instead, I focused on being present, on appreciating the life I have rather than mourning the one I imagined. And you know what? It brought me peace. But self-compassion isn't just about how we treat ourselves. It's also about who we surround ourselves with. Sometimes, it's not just our own self-criticism holding us back, but the people in our lives who drain our energy and make us feel like we're never enough. Learning to let go of toxic relationships is just as important as letting go of regret. Because at the end of the day, life isn't about holding onto what weighs us down. It's about making space for what lifts us up. 6. Relationships that drain you more than they nourish you. Did you know that loneliness can be as harmful to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day? That's not just some dramatic claim. It's a reality I've seen unfold in the lives of people around me. And let me tell you, loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about feeling unseen, unheard, and unvalued. Sometimes, that kind of loneliness happens even when you're surrounded by people. I used to believe that long-standing relationships were unshakable. If I'd known someone for 20, 30, even 40 years, that had to mean something, right? But here's the hard truth. History does not guarantee value. I remember sitting through conversations that felt like obligations, listening to the same complaints, offering the same reassurances, and walking away more drained than fulfilled. At some point, I had to ask myself, why am I still holding on? Jim was one of those people. A friend from way back, someone I once shared laughter and good times with. But over the years, every conversation turned into a therapy session, his therapy session. He'd unload his problems, barely pausing for a breath, and if I ever shared something of my own, it was brushed aside. One day, I tested a theory. I stopped calling. And you know what? He never noticed. The weight I felt lifting from my shoulders was all the proof I needed that not every friendship is meant to last a lifetime. Now, I'm not saying we should go around cutting ties at the first sign of negativity. But relationships should add something to your life, not just take from it. Think of it like a meal. If a friendship nourishes you, leaves you feeling warm and full, it's worth savoring. But if it leaves you feeling empty or worse, sick, you wouldn't keep eating it, would you? And then, there's family. That's a tricky one. We grow up being told that family is everything. And for some, it is. But what if your family drains you? What if their words cut, their presence makes you anxious, and their love feels more like a chain than a choice? I once thought family deserved unlimited chances. But as I got older, I realized that peace is a limited resource. And I wasn't willing to spend mine on people who refused to respect my boundaries. The best relationships don't just keep you company, they see you. They remind you of your worth. They encourage you to grow. And growth doesn't always come from the people we expect. It might be an old friend who's been there all along, or someone new, a neighbor you've always waved at but never spoken to, a fellow volunteer, or even the barista who remembers your coffee order. If you're holding onto a relationship out of obligation, take a small step back. Just for a moment, see how it feels. If that absence brings you peace, maybe it's time to let go. And here's the thing. Once we clear away the weight of toxic relationships, we start to see another burden we've been carrying: outdated beliefs. The things we were told about love, duty, and self-sacrifice don't always hold true as we age. Maybe it's time to challenge them. Do you feel it's time to let go of draining relationships? Drop a 1 in the comments if you're ready to embrace healthier connections, or a 0 if you're still hesitant. Let's talk about it. 7. Outdated beliefs that limit you. It's funny how people talk about age like it's some kind of stop sign. Like once you hit a certain number, you're supposed to sit back, play it safe, and let life slow down. But I've never been one for following those kinds of rules. And neither were the people who inspired me most. Think about it. Colonel Sanders didn't even fry his way into history until his 60s. Grandma Moses? She didn't pick up a paintbrush seriously until her 70s. And yet, their names live on. Why? Because they didn't let a number define them. They didn't let the world tell them they were done. I'll be honest, I used to think certain doors were closed to me, too. I'd hear about something new, learning a language, traveling somewhere different, trying my hand at painting, and I'd have that little voice in my head say, you missed your chance. But the older I get, the more I realize how wrong that voice was. The best opportunities in life don't come with an expiration date. Sometimes, they're waiting for you right at the moment you decide to embrace them. Take my friend Bill, for example. Spent his whole life in accounting, running numbers, keeping everything in perfect order. Retired at 65, sat around for a year, and got restless. One day, he picked up a guitar, just something to pass the time, he said. Fast forward a few years, and that man is out playing at local cafes, having the time of his life. If you ask him, he'll tell you retirement wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of a new one. And it's not just hobbies, it's friendships, too. People say it's hard to make new friends as you get older. I don't buy that. Some of the best conversations I've ever had happened with people I didn't even know a few years ago. I think the secret is staying open to listening, to sharing, to letting life surprise you. The world is full of incredible people, but you'll never meet them if you think your social circle is set in stone. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds nice, but change is hard. And you're right, it is. But hard doesn't mean impossible. Hard just means you have to take the first step. Maybe it's signing up for a class, calling an old friend, or just deciding that today, you're going to try something new instead of sticking with the same old routine. And while we're talking about old routines, let's talk about spending habits. If there's one thing I've seen too many people do, it's hold on to the idea that they shouldn't spend money on themselves. For years, we prioritize everyone else, kids, grandkids, responsibilities, and somewhere along the way, We forget that it's okay to invest in our own happiness, too. Listen, I'm not saying go blow your savings on a sports car, unless that's your thing. Then, by all means. But I am saying it's okay to treat yourself, to do things that bring you joy, to stop feeling guilty about enjoying life. It's not indulgence, it's self-care. If taking that art class, or traveling to a place you've always dreamed of, or even just upgrading your old recliner makes your life a little richer, then do it. You've earned it. So here's my challenge for you. Think about one thing you've been putting off because you thought it was too late. And then, take one step toward making it happen. Maybe it's signing up for a class. Maybe it's dusting off that old camera. Maybe it's just calling a friend you haven't talked to in years. Whatever it is, don't let time hold you back. If you believe it's never too late to start something new, type 1 in the comments. If you're still on the fence but willing to give it some thought, type 0. Either way, let's prove that life doesn't stop at any age. It just keeps getting more interesting. 8. Fear of spending money on yourself. You've spent a lifetime making sure everyone else was taken care of. Whether it was your kids, your spouse, or even friends who needed a helping hand, you always put their needs ahead of your own. It's second nature, isn't it? That quiet sense of responsibility, the feeling that your role is to provide, to make sure those you love never have to struggle the way you did. And after years of doing it, it becomes more than a habit. It becomes who you are. I know, because I lived that way for decades. I worked hard, saved every penny I could, and always thought about the future, never about the present. I'd tell myself, one day, I'll take that trip. One day, I'll upgrade this old chair. One day, I'll treat myself to something nice. But somehow, one day never came. There was always a reason to put it off. Another bill, another expense, another family need that seemed more important. And before I knew it, years had passed, and I was still waiting for the right time to enjoy what I had worked for. Then something changed. I lost a friend, someone who had lived much the same way I had. He worked tirelessly, saved diligently, and always put others first. He had plans, dreams of what he'd do someday. But someday never came for him. He passed before he ever got to enjoy the things he'd worked so hard for. And I realized then, with painful clarity, that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life waiting. I didn't want to look back and regret all the things I never allowed myself to enjoy. That's when I started asking myself a simple question. What am I saving for if not to live? Now, don't get me wrong. I still believe in being responsible. I'm not saying throw caution to the wind and spend recklessly. But I am saying there's a balance. There's a difference between being smart with money and depriving yourself of joy out of habit. We get so used to holding on, to saving, just in case, that we forget to enjoy the life we've built. I remember reading about an economist who once said, "Money's only purpose is to be used." It sounds obvious, but think about it. What's the point of saving every penny if you never allow yourself to enjoy any of it? What's the point of working hard all your life if you never give yourself permission to experience the rewards? And let's be honest, the things that bring us joy aren't always extravagant. It's not about yachts and diamond rings. Sometimes, it's as simple as buying a more comfortable chair so your back doesn't ache when you sit. Or taking a weekend trip somewhere you've always wanted to go, just because you can. Or ordering the good meal at a restaurant instead of always picking the cheapest option out of habit. These aren't indulgences. They're acts of self-care. They're reminders that you, too, deserve comfort and happiness. I used to feel guilty about spending on myself. Even after my kids were grown, even after I knew I could afford it, I still hesitated. But then I realized something. My kids didn't want me to live with constant sacrifice. They wanted me to be happy. They wanted me to enjoy my life. And if you ask the people who love you, I bet they'd say the same. So if you've been putting things off, waiting for the right time, I want to ask you this. What if the right time is now? What if you've already earned the happiness you keep postponing? If there's something you've been wanting to do, something you've been denying yourself for years, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to say yes to yourself. You've spent your whole life taking care of others. Maybe now it's your turn. So, what's the takeaway here? It's simple, really. Letting go is not about losing anything, it's about making room for something new. The habits, the things, the relationships that weigh us down, they don't define us. It's the courage to release them that sets us free, and that's where true growth happens. I've learned, especially as I've gotten older, that change isn't something to fear. It's an opportunity to embrace, to find more joy, and to really start living life the way we deserve. So, if you're watching this and feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the things you've been holding onto, whether it's something physical or emotional, just know that it's okay to let it go. It's not about abandoning what's important, but rather about making room for what will make you feel whole again. You've earned it. If you've enjoyed this story and found it helpful, I'd love for you to subscribe and join me on this journey. And, if you're feeling ready to let go, share your thoughts in the comments. Maybe a 1 if you're ready to embrace change, or a 0 if you're still thinking it over. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Thank you for spending this time with me. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself, and remember, there's always room for a fresh start. See you soon.